WNYC TV presents About the Arts with Barbara Lee Diamondstein.
Welcome to About the Arts. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein, and I'm especially pleased to welcome our two guests today, the celebrated soprano Maralin Niska and the multimedia director Frank Corsaro. A bit of explanation. I mean opera, Broadway, off-Broadway, and television.
Oh, that multimedia.
A warm welcome to you both. Just before we came on the air, I was asking Maralin how she became a singer. And you said that you've had encouragement all along the way. I must say it is a surprise and a delight to find an opera singer born and musically trained in America. How does a Californian become an opera singer?
With great difficulty. I came from a high school that was mainly geared for the vocational arts. And I can remember when I began winning small contests around the area that people would say, "You won that contest and you're from San Pedro." I had a high school music teacher. I was not a music major. Even in college, I went on and got a degree in English literature. And I went on and taught school, in grammar school, never having majored in music. But my...
was that an insurance policy?
Yes. My parents encouraged me to have a vocation, something I could do for a living, you know. And then if you want to sing, fine. And I just was encouraged by my high school teacher, and then by private teachers, and in college by extracurricular singing. And every time I auditioned, it turned out nicely for me. I must say, everything's been easy as far as getting auditions successfully and you know, being successful in auditions. The hardest part is just the work, or the memorization, and learning to be an actress, and going through the psychoanalysis of trying to create characters, people, different people on the stage.
How important is it for a fine voice to be a fine actor?
It's very important, and just as important as being a fine singer.
I think we should ask the director, how significant is that?
Well, I think for instance, my whole work premise in opera is precisely that, which is to create singing, acting performances. Without it, I don't think that opera is really worth its salt. It's the greatest of the collective arts, and that means you really have to collect the great elements that are involved in both acting and singing, and to project them in a very inimitable way. Without the ability of the singer to act, a tremendous dimension is lacking and missing. And since opera is probably superhuman in its impact, meaning that it's intensely passionate and expresses human emotion on a highly intensified level, without the real participation of the actor in that, I mean, it's an almost impossible art to project.
Was that always the case? Was there always as much emphasis on acting ability?
Well, let's put it this way, that oddly enough, I have been studying a lot of background material in this. Most of the great voices that I came across in the past, by coming across, I mean historically, were fairly flawed voices. What made them remarkable was their ability to translate human emotion and human experience through those voices. Now,
who comes to mind?
Well, I mean, name any of them, of the great people of the past, the Giuditta Pasta and Malibran, people of, you know, who have those reputations as being extraordinary singing actresses. Certainly, by the way, in our own time, Maria Callas is a perfect example, you know.
It's hard to believe that you've been a director for more than 30 years. You were one of the founders of Off-Broadway in 1947.
Well, I think yes, we founded Off-Broadway in 1947.
When you say we founded it, who are we and what did you do?
Well, I was at Yale at the time, and I directed a production of No Exit by Sartre, which had flopped on Broadway a year before. And we did a whole new adaptation of it. A bunch of actors at the Yale Drama School. Somebody saw us, said, let's take it to a little spot off Broadway, the Cherry Lane Theater. We brought it there. I was paid $15 for it.
What was happening at the Cherry Lane Theater?
That's fantastic.
Oh, there was a sort of a father and daughter team. I've forgotten their names, but he was a man in his 80s who was Gilmore. That was his name, Gilmore. He was still doing these old plays, you know, and his daughter was still his leading lady. I mean, one of those, something right out of a...
and who was in your Sartre play?
Nobody that actually continued their career in the theater, except that the leading man did. He was a Greek named Alexis Solomas, who now is one of the heads of the Greek National Theater as a director. He was acting then.
Was the Cherry Lane Theater then the first off-Broadway theater?
Yes, absolutely.
Where were they playing Strindberg and Shaw?
What do you mean? Well, that was also the Cherry Lane Theater. I followed the No Exit with the creditors of Strindberg, and that had a very wonderful cast. That had Beatrice Arthur, who's now the Maud lady, and George Roy Hill, who was the director. The third fellow, again, it has sort of slipped out of sight. I don't know what became of him as an actor. I don't think he continued. But we had star-studded casts in those days. We
for
still do.
$15 they're performing.
Oh, no, for the creditors I got 75.
How did one theater make a movement? What came after
Well, what
the Cherry
happened
Lane?
was that No Exit received remarkable reviews. I remember George G. Nathan, who was just simply on the eve of his retirement, wrote this glowing notice on how we had rescued a very important play which had flopped on Broadway the year before. And I mean, we just were sold out all the time, you know, and I got $15 a week royalty. I mean, I was really living. And people were suddenly aware that, you know, one could go to the theater and pay very little and see something special. We then followed that immediately. A year later, it ran for a year, we started to do creditors. And at about that time, the Circle in the Square began its operations. You know, it began, other movements
Was that Quintero and Mann at that point?
Yeah, began to mushroom.
Wasn't involved in the founding of that, was he?
I think so, in the Circle. And that started. Then there was also the Bleecker Street Playhouse down there. That was an organization that attempted to bring sort of Broadway casts to off-Broadway, and that didn't last very long. But we took over the theater. I'll never forget one wonderful night, was still in my memory. The creditors is really Strindbergian, you know, the woman who says, "Who, me?" suddenly turns into a harpy, you know. And we were on the Bleecker Street Theater stage, which is right down in Bleecker Street, and every drunken bum wanders up and down. And I'll never forget, I was standing in the back, and this drunk staggered in during the performance, wandered in, you couldn't stop them, and leaned in the back and looked. And on the stage, there was, you know, what was going on between this man and woman was simply terrifying. He was having a sort of a fit on stage, and she was demanding that he kiss her hand, you know, one of those Strindberg moments. Well, this man suddenly let out a whoop, "Let me out of here," and reeled out of the theater. I fell down laughing in the back. It was marvelous. There was this piece of life coming in. Not even the theater could offer.
Where did you go from off-Broadway?
Well, then I went to Broadway and radio. I was in a lot in radio and television. Did a lot of television acting.
As a performer yourself?
Yes, I was both a performer and a director in those days, you know.
Well, here we hear how the Yale drama student becomes director, actor, and now we have to hear how the teacher becomes performer. What did you teach?
I taught grade school. Nothing as exciting as this. There wasn't anything like this. I was in the Civic Light Opera in L.A., and that was the most exciting thing around in L.A., you know.
What was your first role?
In opera? That's a good question. Oh, I know. Yeah, I did Marguerite in Faust with pianos, with two pianos.
This is the Civic Light Opera?
No. This was a college, a small college nearby where I lived.
Well, how did you make the transition? How did you have the courage, particularly with that familial caveat, have a vocation,
it's
to
been quite
become
an
a
interesting experience in my life. It's a very personal thing. You know, if anyone asked me who my psychoanalyst was, I'd have to say Frank Corsaro, because we've worked together so closely. And he has pulled out of me facets of my personality that I didn't think existed. He has required me to laugh uproariously on stage and smoke on stage and slap people and fall down and do all kinds of things that I never thought I could do. how did I make the transition? I had a principal who was badly treated. And when he was transferred, I said, this is it. I'm going to stop teaching. And
School principal?
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to stop teaching and learn to be a singer. And some people said, yay, Niska, and we know you can do it. And others said, you're a fool. And so I went 1 year to USC.
How old were you then? You didn't tell us when it was. I'm just curious.
I'm not going to tell you my age then or now or any other time.
I consider it privileged communication too.
Oh,
but
well,
you will tell your biographer.
You keep it a secret. I
For how long had you been teaching?
How long had I been teaching?
Yes.
4 years. And I knew I had it made because I had life diploma or what you call
tenure of some
sort.
sort.
It wasn't exactly. It was tenure, yes, but it's also in the state of California. You are permanently a teacher. I mean, you have a permanently credentialed. So I went to USC, and actually, my first serious round with opera was with Walter Decloux, and he was a man of some knowledge and background. And
how did you make
I
that
don't know why I picked at USC. Well, I guess I do too. There wasn't anything of any value much at UCLA then. So I went to SC, and it was also the closest to my house. And he worked with me very hard, and I did a boy's role, pants role. Actually, that was my first staged, costumed, full production, and in Tales of Hoffmann. Then the next thing they did was Susanna, which Mr. Corsaro has already mentioned. They had just done it at New York City Opera with Mr. Corsaro directing.
Yeah, I had done
and
that.
He decided to do the West Coast premiere because he had me.
That was the first opera I ever directed,
Yeah.
Susanna.
It was my first opera also.
And you found her at USC?
No, he was in New York and I was in Los Angeles.
Yes. Well, how did you two get together?
Well,
New York City Opera.
at the New York City Opera.
Well, first you had to wend your way eastward. How did that come about?
Well, I joined the Met National, the Metropolitan Opera National Company, a company that I believed in very much, very strongly. And Frank and Julius Riddell and some of the people from the company came to see me at a performance of Susanna here in New York with the Met National.
How is one accepted to a company of that sort?
With great difficulty, because I can tell you the rest of the story. I finally went into New York City Opera in '67, and I did Traviata and the Countess. Never saw Frank at any rehearsals. In the spring, in '68, they needed Butterfly. Now, I wasn't listed to do Butterfly. I wasn't covering Butterfly. It was not one of my assignments, but I'd been doing it in the Met National. They said, come in this afternoon. I had a 3-hour rehearsal, and it was loaded with Frank Corsaro staging and
What does that mean, Frank
I mean, it was
Corsaro
complicated. It was very complicated and very insightful and very different. Very different.
Well, it's
How
like...
does Frank Corsaro describe Frank Corsaro staging?
Well, why she says it's difficult is because most opera stages don't attempt to create, frankly, living experiences. In other words, the opera singer doesn't live on the stage.
Details,
the opera singer
lots of
only
details.
sings. And I demand that they live. That means they live in a certain place, they do certain things, and they
So
execute
they look more
them.
like the traditional sets that we are accustomed to, rather than an environment or a suggestion that most
Set
opera sets are.
versus environment. Good way to put it. Yeah.
So I think I've got it right. Frank came to see the performance.
Susanna.
No. Butterfly.
Butterfly. You were looking for a butterfly.
No, he wasn't looking for one.
Oh.
He was curious, I would imagine. I had one single 3-hour rehearsal to learn that entire Butterfly. And I remember very well he came backstage, and I remember other members of the company saying, you know, you remembered everything but putting the lid down on the chest that I had used, some chest that the lid has to come down on. And from then on, I think people, especially Frank, knew I was in the company. I think that's my story.
Yeah. What was the
And
first?
then Frank suddenly came to a Traviata rehearsal, and he said, let's work on Traviata, and let me tell you my ideas. And I had, before that, worked with Lafi Mansouri, Jose Quintero, and Gita Hager. In addition to Walter Decloux and Jan Popper. But these were the directors I had known before that.
In what opera did you both first work together?
Butterfly, well, Traviata, I guess.
No, I mean in a brand new production. Yeah.
Brand new. Well, would you count Calvin Pagliacci?
Probably.
Yeah, the
Probably.
remake of
Yeah.
Pagliacci.
You've mentioned such a wide range of operatic roles. How many Do you
Oh,
know?
well, I've done 15 with Frank at New York City Opera alone.
Well, how many
and
roles
25
do you know?
altogether at New York City Opera in 9 years.
And in how many languages?
4 languages. I've done probably very close to 50 roles in 12 years.
That is awesome.
But 25 of them at New York City Opera. It'll be 10 years this fall for me at New York City Opera.
And how long have you been there? And how did you wend your way from television to the opera?
Well, actually, from the stage to the opera. I was asked by Julius Riddell to direct an opera in the season of 1958.
How'd you feel about being asked to do opera?
Well, I always loved opera.
Excuse me, but I
No,
always wanted
please
to know.
do.
I always loved opera. As a
liked
matter
it,
of
didn't
fact, to be honest, I was a member of the claque
Oh,
at the
yeah?
Metropolitan when I was a kid. That was the only way I could get in to see the operas. You know, say bravo for this one and bravo for that one.
No kidding.
And I had directed a play on Broadway, and Julius was trying to get a bunch of new directors for it, and I was one of them. I did the third revival of Susanna, and it turned out to be quite the most successful of the three, and I loved it, but I did not direct another opera for 10 years. I went back to Broadway, got involved there, got involved with the Actors Studio Theater, and again in 1965 it was, I got a call from Julius about doing another opera. Actually, because I inquired myself. I decided that somehow I wanted to get into that area. I was feeling rather disgusted and disappointed and disillusioned about where Broadway was going. I still do. I mean, it's a nowhere place.
How about
And
off-Broadway or off-Broadway?
all of them are, you know, treading the same path. But somehow opera seemed a fresh place to be in.
What was the first opera you ever heard? Was it part of your own background?
When I was a kid on the Metropolitan broadcast, I can't remember what it was. I have no idea.
Well, the reason I ask that is you called opera earlier the most collective of art forms.
Yes.
I've often heard it referred to as the most alien of art forms
No.
for Americans.
Oh, no.
Well, if
Well, just the very fact that it is in a language other than one's own, and that the storyline is difficult to follow, that need not mean that people do not appreciate it, but of the various art forms that there is broad-based involvement, I suspect that opera is not the highest of the list.
I would say that probably originally one would have that. It was certainly caviar for the general, but as it becomes much more of a theatrical entity, it's incidentally in the last 10 years there's been an enormous rise in the popularity of opera.
How do
know.
you...
I mean, every city practically in the country, every major city has an art center, and the jewel of that center is an opera house. And I mean, for instance, Maralin works all over the world and all over this country. I mean, very busy schedule. Now, obviously, she couldn't do that unless there were sources for her.
You have performed with practically every single opera company in this country, isn't that correct?
A lot of them.
How far in advance do you plan your schedule?
Well, always a year, more likely 2 years.
Is
Between
that
a year and 2
usual
years.
for people involved in the opera, more so, for
Yeah.
example, than theater?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, it
Yes.
falls together very nicely because New York City Opera has become somewhat of a permanent scheduling, you see. So every fall and spring I know I'll be there. So I have to work around that, you see.
And are there any other fixed timetables in your schedule?
Beyond New York City Opera, no. Excuse me. The Met has come now into my life in the last 4 years, and it fits in somewhere in between.
Is
You
singing
see.
at the Met still the same thing for a performer as it was traditionally and mythically?
Well, I have to speak in two ways. Personally, I never had that kind of dream. I've always felt that wherever I sing, I should do my best, and that singing at the Met will not make me sing any better or any worse or any differently. It was not, therefore, a goal, but singing well was a goal. Do singers generally still have that dream? Yes, I think you'll hear, oh, I want to sing at the Met, but I think it's leveled out a little bit. I don't think it has quite the impact it did when I was a child.
I suspect that's correct, but I don't know what the reason is.
The reason is simply what Frank has been saying, that there are more opera companies now, and that the New York City Opera has gained a place for itself in opera in the United States, and other opera companies have come up. to and challenged the position. In other words, if you want to be first, you've got to have some reason for being first. You can't just live on a reputation.
Yeah, and there's been an enormous shift too in opera. The opera of old was the opera of the great voices, you know what I mean? And not that we don't have great voices now, but we have great other things that, and frankly, well, we have performers who really can get in there and create characters and singing characters, which is very special. There's a whole shift. And frankly, too, the age of the great voice is really fading.
Why?
There aren't that many.
And how do you explain that?
Don't ask me. I don't know.
Of course, I can challenge that and say, what is a great voice?
What is a great voice?
Exactly. I mean, how do we
How do you
really
compare the
know?
human voice to other musical instruments?
How do you compare it? You know what? In other words, you're saying there are good cellos and bad cellos and good violins and bad violins.
What is a great voice?
I think it's a very personal thing, and I don't think it's on the basis of how many fans you have or how popular you are or how well known you are.
We know that.
I think it's how the voice fits how you look and how you act on stage.
Pardon me, I was just coughing.
I think it's a totality.
Yeah, but you know, they used to have the roster in the old days. You'd have Pinza, Yeritza, or Lucrezia Borri, and what's her name? Poncel.
I mean, there was a mini-star
Caruso,
system that attains a Pavarotti, a Beverly
There aren't
Sills.
that many. Yes, you name now, you'll get 5 names if you're lucky. You know.
And it isn't necessarily based on a beautiful, great voice, you understand? Because we're living in an age of Madison Avenue. And this kind of notoriety can be bought if you have the money. You can sing for 25 years and never be heard from.
Wasn't that always the case?
No, no. Very often singers were already very famous by the time they were 35. And there was not the publicity to be bought as there is today. What went around in, let's say, 40, 50 years ago, what got into the news was something that you did personally.
Is there any
rather than
singer that particularly inspired you?
That inspired me? As a child, you mean, or after I got into the business? After I got in the business, there are very few singers that inspire me except those who are ethical and hardworking. And no single singer, I think, necessarily inspires me. As a child, yes. Marian Anderson inspired me as a youngster. She was the first person I ever heard in concert.
How can an opera singer be unethical? What does that mean?
Oh!
I like that sound.
Just like
what does it mean?
any human being can be unethical.
In terms of performances, upstaging someone?
I can think of the first time I ever knew about it, when I was in the chorus, and it was really so unimportant as I look back. The man who did it is now dead. But there was to be an audition for the Pink Panther. Do you remember that wild show that never made it out of Boston, I think? But anyway, there was to be an audition, and he simply told certain people, not everybody. And then when word got out that the audition had been held, many people were very upset that he hadn't told them.
Opera singers have a reputation for being more temperamental than other artists. Do you think that's true?
I don't agree with that at all. I rarely see temperament from my fellow singers. It's usually from directors, pianists, conductors, the people around, hairdressers, makeup men, but I must speak up for my fellow singers. I have rarely seen it from a singer.
Some equal time from the director?
Well, I mean, temperament is very, very important in the arts. You know, without it, I mean, you would not have excitement. I'm sorry that Maralin feels that there isn't in her end of the profession as much temperament.
I just say I've never seen it.
Oh, well, I have. You know, I have. But I mean, there's temperament all over. The question is, will the temperament work?
And translate itself into a first-rate performance.
Does it translate, and is it workable with, you know? Because without temperament, she has a lot of temperament.
My mother told me a temperamental person must be more mental than temper.
Well, you see, you are somehow...
You did not follow her earlier advice, however.
Well, and she said, and save what is known as temperament for the stage.
Yeah, well, the idea is that temperamental suggests something not good, But I don't think that's true. I think, of course...
You think of it as a passionate, explosive quality
yes, but
that really
she's
lends
making a point
performance.
about the ethical aspect of this, which of course occurs in the ethical and the unethical occurs.
Well, I think it's the useless display, which isn't that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
The useless display.
Prima donna, not in the sense exactly.
Yes, that's what
right.
Both of our guests have such obviously protean talents. Here, Maralin Niska started by founding a political club. Is that correct? How did that happen? Can you tell us briefly?
What did I start by? Well, they needed another democratic club in my town, a liberal, active young persons club. Was the rest of the people in another club were older and conservative, so we just did it. And
are you still interested and active in politics?
I'm very interested, but can't be active right now. Very interested.
Can't be active because of?
Yeah, it takes time, I think. I could make certain personal appearances, but I'm extremely interested.
And the other prodigious talent, Mr. Corsaro, now adds another thing to his long list of accomplishments, and that is he has become an artist, a caricaturist at that. I don't know if these pictures reproduce very well, but I'll read some of the titles to you. Here is an old opera singer, and that is entitled Remembered Triumphs.
Ah, yes.
And
that's not an opera singer.
No. Mama Lucia.
That's Cavalleria. Yes.
Manon Lescaut. Now, why am I holding all of these wonderful photographs up? Cleopatra and Rodolfo.
Yes.
Actually, for the benefit of the New York City Opera.
Right.
Can you tell us something about your 80 caricatures?
My 80 caricatures, plus the other 3 we're going to try to do on stage. Well, around April 11th, I'm being honored by the New York City Opera with a sort of late afternoon soiree in which they're going to, among other things, auction off, for the benefit of the New York City Opera, 85 of my opera caricatures, also memorabilia from other productions which I've been involved with, and Maralin, among other guests, will also auction some of these off, sing, and regale the audience with general... Oh, you didn't know about that?
Well, now you know. We're just about ready to go off the air. Sorry that we didn't get a chance to talk about musical criticism, but I noticed that all of the caricatures of critics are all rendered without ears.
Yes, isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting? Well, I wish you both would, but I'm afraid we're going to have to do it another time.
Oh, dear.
It's been a delight to talk with you, almost as good as listening to you and watching you. Thank you for coming, Maralin Niska. Frank Corsaro, I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein with About the Arts, and thank you, audience, for being with us.
Ba 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 ba